Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking all things hill training. We're going to discuss how to know whenever you're ready to implement hills into your training and the massive fitness gains you could see from a properly structured hill training block. Every runner knows that running up and down hills is a pretty strenuous exercise, so you want to be sure that your body is ready before just jumping into these hills. Ideally, you would give yourself at least 3 months of a general conditioning block. This aerobic base phase is absolutely critical because it lays physical adaptations and foundations within your body that will allow you to handle these harder hill sessions and then eventually speed work and racing. The entire goal of an aerobic base phase is to raise one's maximum aerobic capacity, which is essentially just the fastest effort that you can run while staying fully controlled and relaxed. If you want a full breakdown on how to properly build an aerobic base, I'll link the video above. But just know that that is phase 1 and absolutely critical before moving on to phase 2, which are the hills. Coach Arthur Lydiard is famous for popularizing this aerobic base period, which is essentially marathon training that he would prescribe to not only his distance runners, but his middle distance runners as well. The truth is, this style of training was nothing new. Even in the 1960s, Arthur Lydiard was just much better of a salesman. Lydiard's true genius really lied in how he structured his hill training. Lydiard viewed the hill training phase as an extension of the aerobic base phase and an introduction into anaerobic work. The reason that Lydiard's hill training is still used to this day is because it's rooted in human physiology and not some flashy workout trend. Running both up and down hills with proper form, which we're going to cover in a minute, is essential for re-stimulating fast twitch muscle fibers. During a proper aerobic base phase, the primary movers will actually be slow twitch muscle fibers. Hill training is a highly safe and effective way to re-stimulate the fast twitch muscle fibers without jumping straight into repeats or interval work on the track. Because your body is working against gravity when you're running uphill, you are essentially doing a plyometric exercise for your legs because you are eccentrically loading the muscle, stretching it, and then forcing your body to generate the power to push you up and forward to continue the running motion. This is essentially the most specific strength training you can get for runners. Now, there's a million different ways that you could structure these hill workouts, so let's just look at a few examples. The hill circuit that Lydiard had his athletes train on in Auckland, New Zealand was a 1.8 mile loop. Now, after about 2 miles or 15 minutes of easy jogging, the athletes would start up Whitney Street. The entire climb of Whitney Street was about a half a mile or 800 meters, but it wasn't straight uphill the entire time. The first climb being pretty steep with about 4 to 5% grade and taking 30 seconds to crest for a short flattening out part to let the heart rate recover. The middle section was the longest, but the most gradual. Another quick flat section at the top to let the heart rate recover again, before the final and steepest section saved for last. Now, upon reaching Donovan Avenue at the top, they would truly just jog and let their heart rate recover before essentially bombing it down Boundary Road, another 800-meter drop where Peter Snell, 3-time Olympic champion, famously set a new 800-meter world record going down the hill. At the bottom, once the runners reach Dundale Ave, this would be a few series of wind sprints. Similar to the alactic sprints we talked about in a previous video, these would be short 50 to 100 meter sprints to, again, re-stimulate the fast twitch type 2A and 2B muscle fibers, but not making these repetitions so long to where they were building up lactic acid and creating too much fatigue, because after those sprints, they would head back up the hill. Now, typically these athletes would do the full circuit 4 times, with the warm-up and cool-down making it about 12 to 13 miles in total. They would run pretty fast on the downhills. They would let gravity do some of the work and get their legs just used to moving fast again. The exact technique they used to run up the hill would vary on the experience and the goals of the athlete. Lydiard was famous for having his athletes do drills while running up these hills. I did my best to demonstrate some of them. The first one here is called hill knees. It's essentially just high knees going up the hill. The best thing about doing these up a hill is that it forces your body to really land on the ball of your foot and push off with your toes, really strengthening the plantar fascia in the foot, the Achilles, the calf muscle, the entire posterior chain essentially. This is great for strengthening those areas. If there are areas that are already injured or banged up for you, I wouldn't recommend doing these because it could possibly aggravate them. Lydiard would always talk about how his athletes never had Achilles or hamstring problems because they always focused on this hill training. But yeah, you can see here, really just working on that arm drive, knee drive, and you just want the feet to be moving quick, keeping your eyesight ahead, essentially just exaggerating the running motion while going uphill. Trying to do this up the entire half-mile hill would be impossible. Lydiard would have his athletes break them up into sections, so maybe 20 seconds at a time, let the heart rate recover, and then continue up the hill. The next exercise, and slightly more difficult, would be the hill skips. Just like you'd normally skip, but you're going up the hill and really exaggerating the knee lift and the arm drive to push yourself off the ground, land on the same foot, switch feet, and do it on the opposite leg. Again, this is a great plyometric exercise that recruits these fast twitch fibers because you are stretching, loading the muscle, and then firing off it very explosively with the added resistance from the hill and gravity. So yeah, the more that you can utilize the arms, the better. From the front knee, the back leg should be straight. When you're getting that straight back leg, you know you're generating as much force and as much power as necessary. When that back knee is bent on the stride, you're not getting as much power as you could be. Here's this awesome photo of Pekka Vasala from Finland winning the 1972 1500 meter Olympic final, out-kicking this gentleman to his left in the home stretch. You can see his back leg is entirely straight. He has that awesome leg lift. I mean, similar to the guy beside him, but
Vasala tällä hetkellä ensimmäisenä 50 metriä maaliin. Pekka Vasala voittaa. Hän voittaa ja tuo meille toisen kultamitalin vajaan puolen tunnin sisään. Vasala voittaa.
Pekka trained under Lydiard for about a year. Lydiard actually went to Finland and helped some of their athletes train in the early 70s. And it's reported that Vasala maintained a lot of this hill bounding in his training leading up to the Olympic Games. He had about a 100 to 200 meter hill that he would consistently train on about 3 times a week. I think this is a pretty clear example that running up hills is a great way to mimic the exact mechanics that you're going to be using for faster portions of races without the added impact of running on flat ground. Running up hills is just a much safer way to mimic it. Final, and I would say toughest of the hill springing techniques that Lydiard and his athletes would use. Similar to the skips, but instead of landing on the same foot, you're landing on the opposite foot. So you're really using those arms and those knees to drive off the ground, but then you're landing on the opposite foot, quickly springing up, bounding onto the opposite foot. Depending on how steep the hill is will really dictate how difficult this will be. This is a highly demanding and intense exercise and should be gradually introduced into training. Lydiard's famous phrase was like a deer going over a fence. It's not quite what I look like here, but I was giving it my best shot. This is still something I'm working on. This bounding is great because you really get that extension in the back ankle like we saw from Vasala. So yeah, you just want to work on getting that back leg straight as possible, driving off of that toe, driving the arms forward, the opposite arm back to help maintain your balance, and then driving off and doing it again. Even doing these bounds in a pretty slow manner like I am here, you're still recruiting those fast twitch type 2B fibers because it involves that plyometric stretch. Your type 2B muscle fibers have these massive nerve structures in comparison to the slow twitch fibers. Although this is a great transition into speed work, it still is highly demanding and highly strenuous. Now, as far as running downhill, the best way to run downhill is to actually lean into the hill instead of lean backwards like most people do. Leaning backwards actually generates kind of like a braking motion. So you want to let gravity do the work, lean slightly into the hill, and just maintain quick feet. Essentially feel like you're kind of just like freewheeling it down the hill. This is best done on a gentle, gradual slope as opposed to a really steep hill. Super steep hills are not ideal for running down because you're gonna have to lean back in order to keep some sort of control on your speed. But running downhill is a great way to practice the speeds that you hope to hit on race day in a much more controlled manner, because ideally your heart rate won't be as high as it would be if you were running on totally flat ground, because again, you're letting the assistance of gravity pull you down the hill. So long as you maintain a quick turnover, it should feel pretty effortless overall. Ron Daws, in his book, The Self-Made Olympian, talks about how he utilized Lydiard's hill training methods in a slightly different fashion. Daws, who was self-admittedly a very average runner in high school and in college, ended up making the US Olympic team for the marathon in 1968 and finished top 5 at the Boston Marathon multiple times. Mainly due to the fact, according to him, due to the quality of his hill training. Daws stated, and I quote, "If I were limited to using the type of training for every workout, I'd pick the Lydiard style hill workout. It teaches technique and builds stamina and speed. It can be run at any level of difficulty and still works different muscle groups." Well said, Ron. Now, it was Daws' contention that because the marathon was not as reliant on these fast twitch muscle fibers when compared to races like the 800 or the 1500 meter, he saw more benefit in running up these hills strongly at, say, a marathon effort as opposed to bounding or springing. Now, running uphill at a marathon effort or marathon pace is going to cause your heart rate to get pretty close to threshold. You don't want these hill workouts to become too anaerobic. So yes, they should be a solid effort, but you shouldn't be flooding the legs with lactic acid and letting your form break down. It should be tough, but you should be able to maintain your usual running form. Running at this marathon effort uphill is also great because it forces you to actually use your arms quite a bit more as you're driving yourself up. If you lean into the hill as you're going up and really drive the arms, you can see how much of a difference that makes, especially towards the end of these reps after you've done a few circuits. And I know I mentioned this before, but you want to keep your line of sight up the hill slightly. Allow your line of sight to drop and your head to fall forward slightly. It can cause your hips to actually flare out behind you, which will throw off your center of gravity and kind of lead to your form to start breaking down as well. You might be asking yourself, how do you find one of these hill circuits? Well, first of all, it doesn't have to be a circuit, right? You just need a solid hill to run up and down. The circuit is just nice because it's a little bit of change of scenery as you go. Ideally, the road that you're running on is free of potholes and cross traffic, so you can just focus on the running. The exact grade that you should be looking for depends on your experience. Something in the 3 to 5% grade is usually a good place to start. If you don't have a circuit, once you get to the top of the hill, you can just jog around a little bit and let your heart rate recover before coming back down the hill. Make sure as you're coming back down the hill, you're maintaining that high cadence, quick feet. You don't want to be overstriding and putting too much pressure on your hamstrings or your glutes. And what if you live somewhere that's flat? The next best option that you're going to have is running up stairs or bleachers, because it forces you to exaggerate that knee lift and really push off with your back foot. The only downside is that you do kind of have to keep your line of sight down to make sure that you're not tripping up the steps or tripping down the steps when you come back down. If you don't have access to some good stairs, you're going to have to get a little creative. I've even heard about people in Miami running up and down abandoned parking garages and using the ramps inside of those. Where there's a will, there's a way. If you have access to a gym with a treadmill or stair stepper, you can make do with either of those, or plyometric exercises like step ups or box jumps. Now, what should an example week or training block look like for this hill training? First week, you want to make sure that you ease your body into it. Purposefully leave a few reps on the table to make sure that you don't overdo it. Because you are re-stimulating these fast twitch fibers, it can have a pretty exhausting effect on your body and your central nervous system. Both Ron Daws and Keith Livingstone talk about in their books how after the first week or two of hill training, your body can feel pretty wiped out, but if you stick with it for another couple weeks, those feelings will actually reverse and you'll begin to feel better, more energized, and you can even see your pace drop on your easy runs by over a minute per mile. So again, this is highly strenuous, but highly rewarding activity. First week of hill training, you can start out with just 2 sessions that week, maybe 15 to 30 minutes of total hill work depending on your skill level and experience. Eventually you can work up to a schedule like this with Monday, Wednesday, Friday being your key hill sessions and Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday being your easy recovery days. Ideally you want to maintain that long run on Sundays, especially if you're training for the marathon, which would make Monday the toughest day of the week because you'll have a hill session directly after that long run. You want to make sure those easy days are truly easy. It should be like super easy zone 1 true recovery runs. Now after starting out with the easier week, you want to work up to about 4 weeks consecutive of this hill training before moving into your speed work and racing season. Ideally, you would have 6 months to train for your peak race. So the first 3 months could be your aerobic base phase. The 4th month would then be your hill training phase. 5th month focused on anaerobic training, leaving the 6th month for sharpening up and tapering. Ron Daws mentions in his book how he would maintain 1 hill workout a week, especially as he was training for Boston, which is a pretty hilly marathon. In general, that's how it should look. Obviously, you can tailor that to your own specific needs and race goals. Also important to note that the general rule of training also applies to these hills, the same way that you'd want to start with longer and slower runs during an aerobic base phase and then move into shorter, faster runs as you get ready for your race. It's the exact same idea and principle for hill training. Start with some more gradual, easier hills. As those hills start to feel more natural, move into some shorter, more explosive hills that will really allow you to develop more speed and power. Remember, the purpose of these hills is to develop stamina and power. It's not to completely wipe yourself out and leave you exhausted by the time your real workouts and races start. So just remember, be gradual and patient as you introduce these hills so that you can allow your body to acclimate and adapt to the new stress that you're adding to it. Also, important to note that the type of shoe that you wear during these hill workouts will matter. You definitely want something with some padding, but you also want it to be flexible. I would be highly cautious of wearing carbon plates or carbon rods during these workouts because of the flexibility that's required in your foot to truly spring off of these hills. The average carbon plated shoe would really do you a disservice because you won't be able to get that flexibility in your foot, and therefore it won't really be the plyometric exercise that it could be. So wear something comfortable and wear something that will help take the impact as you're running down the hills, and save the carbon plates for race day. But that's pretty much it. Warm up, run really strongly up the hill, let your heart rate recover, run quickly down the hill, and then a couple quick sprints at the bottom of the hill, and then do it all again. Making that transition from the quick sprints into the uphills, pretty jarring at first, but it's a very unique challenge, and it forces your body to adapt on the fly, which is absolutely necessary for competitive racing. There are so many different ways that you can train on hills. This is just a few ways that you could go about hill training, and they seem to have worked for some pretty good runners in the past. Drop a comment, let me know if you're gonna be incorporating hills before your next big race. Hit subscribe and make sure that you don't miss the new videos. And let me know what you guys wanna see next. I'm down to talk about whatever. Happy running, y'all. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.